Ben Blumenrose, I'm thrilled to have you on 20-Minute Playbook. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So let's jump right in. I'd love to start with a recent fascination. What are you fascinated or obsessed by at the moment? What can't you stop thinking about?
Right now, AI and design tools, processes, all that stuff. I think the whole like rise of Dolly, all of a sudden brought with it this other swell of creative tooling that was using AI. And I don't know if you saw this, but for 4 or 5 years, we've been seeing AI and ML as buzzwords in fundraising decks where you're like, it's like, they're just trying to throw a bunch of words that they think investors will gravitate towards. But man, in creative tools, all of a sudden, the way AI and ML is getting used in design and writing, to augment writing, to speed up design processes is just crazy. And I just think like it's really having a moment and it's happening way faster than I thought it would. And so I think for designers, it's like, what do we do in a world where anyone can just speak an image to existence? What does that mean for photographers and illustrators, right? And then guess what? Product designers, it's coming for you too, right? Like when someone just says, I need an app that has a feed with, it's like, right? Like that's coming. So
it's going to be Dolly 3.
Yeah. It's not that far away. So what is our role in that world? And I think it's going to be interesting. So I'm pretty fascinated by it right now.
Yeah, I'd love to get your thoughts, maybe just to double click on that on a little bit, because I guess in my mind, I think people I don't know, I've seen a lot of people have a reaction to Dolly 2 basically saying, oh my gosh, it's coming after designers. And in my mind, you hit the nail on the head. It's not coming after designers yet. It's coming after artists. It's coming after photographers and illustrators.
Yeah.
And then secondarily, there's also a lot of AI tools now that are doing copywriting for you. So it's either taking your bad copy and turning it into okay copy, or it's trying to kind of create copy from scratch. What are your thoughts on both of those? So far, it just seems like supporting tool sets.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is to an extent. I definitely think for a lot of things, it's one of let's say I'm an illustrator, right? And someone comes to me and they say, okay, I want an illustration that does X, Y, Z. Well, then you as an illustrator are going to spend hours and hours sketching a bunch of ideas. And then you're going to go to the client and be like, okay, any of these? And like, no, it's more like the trees need to be bigger and this needs to be more green. And so there's hours and hours of time spent just communicating, right? Because you have someone who has a vision for what the thing should be, trying to communicate to the artist. And I think one of the really cool use cases for something like Dolly is to give that superpower to the person who's trying to communicate to the visual artist, like, hey, this is what I mean. Like, here's a visual representation that's pretty close or captures some of the essence or the tone, and then go off that. And now we're starting way further than we would have started before. But it does at a certain point. So for example, we're investors in a company called Framer, right? And so Framer was this prototyping tool. And at first it was never intended to create the final output. But slowly over time, it's like, as the prototyping tool, well, guess what? Like the prototypes, what are they using to build the prototype? It's HTML and CSS. Like, well, that's a website, right? And then so Framer all of a sudden they realize like, wait a second, like this tool set that we built, we can call it whatever we want to call it. But at the end of the day, it's actually building a final deliverable that people work really hard to build. And we've created a much easier way to do that. And so that's where the tension is for me, where it's like, yeah, for a lot of the workflows, it's going to get you 80 or 90% of the way there, 60, whatever. And you're going to need the artists to then take it to the final stage. But like, there will be things where it'll be good enough, right? If I'm doing a blog post and I can't afford an artist for $1,000 or $2,000, like it's probably good enough, right? So to me, I think like it's interesting. And then also, hey, guess what, artists, like these tools need your work to build the data models, right? But these artists, they're not being compensated in any way, for their intellectual property. And it is like their work, right? So I think that's also interesting. Like if you want to do, obviously this is not possible, but like they let you do things in the style of Van Gogh, illustrations in the style of Van Gogh. Well, let's say there was Daniel Scrivner had a unique illustration style, and there's plenty of illustrators that have that. And I want to do an illustration in the style of Daniel Scrivner. To me, it makes sense that Dolly would say, okay, well, check this out. Like, we'll let you do an illustration in the style of Daniel Scrivner, not the real thing. It's like the equivalent of, you don't get the original painting, you get the printout. And guess what? Daniel Scrivner gets $5 for that, not 1,000. But you literally did not, you, Daniel, didn't need to do anything, right? All you needed to do was create a body of work that this AI system can build a virtual you, right? That's good enough for 90% of the use case. And all of a sudden it multiplied your impact by, 100x, 1,000x. So that stuff is crazy. It's fascinating. And yeah, I think like designers need to lean into it and understand where the edges are for us, as opposed to, I think it's very easy to just be like, this is terrible, like machine's taking over. Let's fight this tooth and nail. Well, it's kind of happening, and we need to embrace it and kind of think about how we use it to our advantage in the creative process, and go from there.
It's fascinating. I love the way you articulated that. The two things that stood out to me is, I think your note is really important around how compensation will work and how intellectual property rights will change, or need to be able to change, or at least need to take into account that, yes, you Daniel Scrivner didn't have to do the work to generate this AI generated artwork, but it's using your intellectual property. And so you'd imagine that should kind of build on something. And it also makes me think of, I don't know, sometimes it's helpful to jump to a different industry because you might look at things a little bit differently. But I would say, I don't think any illustrator would disagree that they should get compensated if they do some piece of artwork in that style. If you were to go and do this in music and you said, give me a beat like Timbaland, I bet Timbaland would want to be compensated for having that style, because it's iconic, his name's on it, his tags on it. It's really interesting. I want to ask a question around how you think about design and what design means to you. And to kind of tee it up, you've spent your entire career focused on design. From your design work as a design lead at Facebook in its early years, to your role as co-director and managing partner at Designer Fund. How do you think about design, and what does design mean to you? And it's a very wide open question, so feel free to take that from any level, from any angle.
Maybe the way I will answer that is just like, why is design important to you? Is that maybe kind of, or like, why
that's
even
great.
Care? Is that kind of
Yeah,
what you're
I think for a lot of people listening, that's probably the question they would ask.
Why you should care? Yeah. So here's the thing. I think, and obviously I've spent decades thinking about this. When design is inherent in design, when done well, is this idea of creating something for a person to use. The act of deliberate creation for a specific use case, right? It's not art, right? There we have art. Design is really, it's meant to be, there's a utility there, right? So inherent in design is the idea that something should be useful. And hopefully, I hope for most designers, it's useful for good, right? So when you think about like the building blocks of a tech company, okay, you have designers, then you have engineers. What's at the core of engineering is it's like the motivation is solving complex problems, and there may be a user at the end of that, or may not be, right? So inherent in good engineering is not necessarily something that's more useful for a person, right? It could be, and it often is, but it doesn't have to be. It's not inherent in the work. And then you have, you go to business school. Okay, well, what gets business people who go to business school excited? Well, for them, it's building a massive business, right? So like getting people to buy stuff or building something of value. So again, people could be at the end of that in some way, but they don't have to be, right? And often what I found is there's like a tension there between domain experts, designers, engineers, and your MBA folks. And it just so happens that designers and maybe customer support people kind of play this role too. They're kind of the end user advocates often, right? And so they're the ones who are saying, well, wait a second, like who's going to use this? Why are they going to use this way? Why is this good for them to use? And so when you take that out of a company, all of a sudden like the balance is off, right? If you have like engineers solving really tough, difficult engineering problems and business folks trying to build a big business, well, there's all sorts of ways to like manipulate and have that grow in a way that actually isn't serving humanity well. And it's not to say like to get up here and be like, oh yeah, design's the end all be all and we always do it right. Don't always do it right, but there's something inherent in design done well that is that, when you break it down to just its core essence, it's trying to help people do things well. And so for me, that's why it's really important, because when you take that away, and that's honestly like why we started Designer Fund. It wasn't like I had a ambition to be an investor by any means, but it's just that people were asking me for help on design so much, on things like education and healthcare. And you start thinking, well, wait a second, if design is absent from these, from the building of these products and services, then who's here to make sure that, in hospitals, that patients are being cared for the right way? Who's here to make sure that students are being cared for the right way, versus just like building something that's good for the school system or good for the hospital, right? So that's the thing that I think for me is the importance of why I'm so like into getting design at the ground floor of every like great company that is getting started today. Because if not, we're just going to get those products and services, and we've all experienced it, right? Like if you've gone to a doctor recently and you've watched the doctor look at the screen half of the time or more versus look at you, the patient, you've kind of felt what happens when design is absent from these things. That's kind of the thing we're trying to fight against. So yeah, that's kind of like why for me design is so important, and why I fight for it and advocate for it and try to like advocate for it in the VC ecosystem.
Yeah. I love that perspective. I mean, it almost sounds like a way to think about design in your mind. It says guardrails. It's like you can channel the resources, meaning your engineers and the money that you've raised as a business and all these ideas and feedback you've gotten from customers in a lot of different directions. And maybe design adds a little bit more intentionality and tries to just make sure that that's all pointed and harnessed in the right direction.
Yeah. And I would say, one of the things that I'm trying to also champion, there's this idea of like human-centered design. You've probably heard of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that sounds great. So that's what's human. It's basically designing for an individual. But I think one of the things that's lacking in human-centered design is like humanity-centered design, right? Because when you're optimizing for the individuals, well, then what happens to the ecosystem at large? And I think, frankly, this is basically what happened at Facebook, is we were trying to create this thing that every individual got a lot of utility out of, assuming that if people loved it for themselves, that would somehow create value or like move humanity in the right direction. And my personal opinion is that it's not enough to just say, oh, I'm going to give you yourself, the person, something that works for you, without taking into account, well, how does that work for you and your community? How does that work for you and your country? How does that work for you in the world? And so that's another piece that I'm hoping like more formal design education starts to take into account, is kind of like the humanity-centered approach to design, and have that be baked into the work that we do.
Yeah. I'd love to ask a question kind of, super Ben focused, which is, as a designer by background, who and what inspires you? And, I guess, things that come to mind are there any designers, illustrators, artists, either historical or, that are active now that inspire you? Or are there any products or companies that you just think the world of?
Yeah. I think that because I come from I come from the fine art world, right? Or not right. Like my background is fine art. Like that was, as a kid, I always drew, painted. And then when computers were invented, I just thought, oh, computer art, I can make money off that? Like, that's a thing? Someone will pay me a ton of money to do? Like, I definitely want to do that. So I think I gravitate towards people who are designers that are, they're almost like artists. And I love this with people, and I love this with companies too. And it's basically this. It's like, take like a task, designing a poster, designing a website, or designing a product. And certain people will be like, okay, what's a reasonable amount of time to do that? So it's like a website. What's a reasonable amount of time to spend on the normal marketing site? Well, it's, I don't know, 30 hours. I don't know. What would you say is like a good amount of time?
It's much higher than that, but I'll stay out of this one.
No, just the visual design. The visual design of a basic marketing site.
Say 30 hours, 40 hours.
Yeah. Okay. To me, it's like, who spends 300 hours to do that, right? And that's like, when you look at like, okay, let's take Stripe, for example, on their marketing sites and the level of detail. And it's just so ungodly over the top. And you just say like, why? Well, why did you go that far? And you realize that because it attracts other people who go that far, right? And so I've always gravitated towards the people who go so much further than everyone. Not like 10% more, but like way, way more. So like, there's a designer that used to work with me on my team. His name's Ben Barry. You can look up his work online. And Ben was always like, I managed him for a little while, and he would say things. I'd be like, okay, how long would this take? And he's like, oh, I need 6 weeks for that. I'm like, 6 weeks? Like, we don't have 6 weeks. We have a week. Yeah, I was hoping it'd be like a week or a week and a half. And he's like, no, I need 6. And I'll spend 10 hours a day on it. And it'll be extraordinary. And the difference between extraordinary and very good is actually quite huge, because extraordinary is the thing that everyone talks about. And very good is just like, oh, okay, there's a lot of very good things. And there are a few things that just are extraordinary. And those are the things that get talked about. So you need to find the right time to do that. So Ben Barry does that. Jessica Hish, who you maybe know, she's a letterer. And that's, it's just like people who have this like level of craft, and they just go they just go so much further than everyone else. They just take that time and that energy. So those are the things that always inspire me. Is like, what is in you that lets you go to version 45, version 70, version 85, right? When you see that file list, it's like website V114. You're like, what? Oh my goodness, man. How long? Wow. Yeah. So that's the stuff I think I really am inspired by. Yeah.
I love that answer because it speaks, my language. I identify with that so much. And, I think a word that I think is synonymous with design in many ways is craftsmanship. And craftsmanship, really, when you ask what is it, it is literally the act of going much further than most people would expect you to go. It makes me think of the Steve Jobs or Johnny Ives quote of, painting the back of the dresser drawer. No one's going to see it, but if it comes out, I think that level makes sense. And, and then maybe one random story that I'll throw in. This is one of the reasons that, I've been fortunate enough to be on a bunch of amazing design teams, but I still think one of my favorite experiences was working at Apple. And when I was there at the time, this is quite a few years ago, back when we were working on one of the many projects that was happening in the building was the new design for the iTunes icon. And this then became somewhat generic in what was selected, which is a little bit of a bummer. It was just like a CD with music notes, that's a slightly different color. But what nobody saw that I got to see was the behind the scenes process behind that. And it literally, to your point, there was one full-time person who literally all he did was do explorations on the iTunes icon. I think he did that project for literally 6 months. And the concepts that he came up with were just amazing. It was everything from like a circus tent that sold tickets to the front of a movie theater to a guitar to simulations of what music might look like. Yeah. And to your point, I think that's how you arrive at something really incredible.
But then it lands on music notes, right?
Yes. And then it's, bum, bum, bum. It's a little bit of a disappointment to the journey. But that's a separate thing.
But here's what's fun. So like at Facebook early days, like we used to have these icons that were they were like way more pixelated. We almost had like a pixelated style early on. But we were super into the stuff that Apple was doing and really inspired by the level of craft there. And so like even within the constraints of these like tiny pixelated icons, we still had our designers who would just sit there and be like, okay, like, because this is going to be seen by so many people, like, how does it communicate the right concept? And it seems when you looked at them, you're like, someone must have spent 20 minutes on this. I remember when we were even hiring designers, people are like, there are designers at Facebook? Like, it doesn't even look like it's designed because it almost looked like a wireframe. Well, early on, that's what it looked. The site looked like very wireframing. They thought it was just used to say Mark Zuckerberg production. And so, but we were inspired, like we would look at Apple and we'd say, look how far they've gone. Let's do that too. Let's go that far. And so I think that's the thing. It's like, and by the way, this is totally antithetical to the whole like startup, move fast, break things and, do the MVP, all that stuff. And so I'm not saying like, and this is exactly why people get frustrated with designers, because you say, hey, I just need a quick site. And they're like, give me 8 weeks, right? So you need to know like when to pick and choose your times and your moments to sweat those details. And then you also need to know when's the time to just like do a site in a day because it just needs to be done and we need to like go, right? So
Yeah.
I need to make sure that there's the yin and yang to all these things.
Well, and that balance is really, really hard to achieve.
Yeah.
I want to talk for a second. You gave, I think, a great overview of how to think about design philosophically and what it's doing for people and how it's kind of making sure to deliver something of value that improves the world for the kind of end human or end customer. Yeah, I want to switch and talk a little bit about the business value of design. And I guess the question I would ask there is, when you are talking, let's say, with the CEO and having that conversation, does it really make sense to spend another month on this or another 2 months on this? How do you think about the business value of design and how it actually contributes value to a company and helps grow its value and grow its reach over time?
Yeah. So here's the thing. Okay. So I love this question because to me, design it's this layer, it's a horizontal layer. You can literally apply that layer to anything. Okay. And I'll give you an example. Like when I joined Facebook, I joined as a product designer we were in the engineering org. So like for me to stay in my lane would have meant, hey, Ben, just build Facebook.com products, do nothing else. And by the way, there was plenty of stuff to do there, right? So it's like, why would you even like, you don't need to go to talk to HR or legal but I was curious. I had joined, the company was about, I don't know, 150, 200 people. And to me, it was like, where else can design have value in this company? So one of the things I did when I first joined Facebook, I found every head of X, right? Head of marketing, head of legal, head of HR, head of customer support. And I just said, look, I'm a designer here. What would you do with design? What would you do with design resources? Because I was a big believer that design, and maybe like I drank my own Kool-Aid too much, but I was a big believer that we could we could supercharge anything. We could improve anything, right? Because design is, you just apply it and bam, right? And so I would say more than half of them were just like, I never even thought about that. That never even crossed my mind that, design and recruiting that's not even a thing. Why is that even a thing? It's like, well, where are people finding out about Facebook? What kind of experience are they having when they come to interview? What's the experience after? And even just this idea of an experience that it's like, what do you mean by that? Why is that? What they come to interview? That's a thing that's designed. That it's like, yes, it's designed or not, right? But it's still something, right? And so I went and talked to every head of X, and what came out of those conversations was like, we could really move the needle for almost any one of those teams. Honestly, even legal, there were things around legal. So like legal wanted to make sure that things were getting patented. Well, how do we communicate that to the employee base? How do we get people excited about that? And there's a lot of design that you can do around that. HR, where people are onboarding. I don't know if you've ever heard yeah. So like, when onboarding, you get a bunch of paperwork and whatever. But like Airbnb, for example, it's like the onboarding there was designed down to like the minute, right? And you talk to anyone that joined Airbnb in the early days, and it's amazing. Like my friends would join, and by Friday, they were like ready to tattoo Airbnb on their chest. Like whatever they did in that first week, I was like, "How's your first week?" They're like, "I will never leave this company ever. This is the best thing." I'm like, "Okay."
That's how good onboarding was.
It was right. Like yeah, no, they nailed that experience. So I think to me, when I think about, it's like, don't think of design as it's like, what are your company goals? And then apply design to those goals. And it can absolutely be applied to like 95% of company goals. And to me, that's where it gets really strategic and used really well.
Yeah, no, very well said. I love the examples you shared. I'd love to switch gears for a second and talk about areas where you have an edge. And what I mean by that is, you can think of it as an edge, you can think of it as a superpower, and this can be either you as an individual, you as an investor at Designer Fund. But where do you think you have an edge or superpower, and how does that show up day to day, either in your investing work or your work with companies?
Yeah, there's two key areas. Okay, so the first one is, we know what good products look like. And so, and you think that, well, doesn't ever, like, no, a lot of people just don't. They don't know what is, and with the difference between good and very good and very good and exceptional, that matters, because when you have a product that is exceptional, That's a product that won't need a lot of marketing spend. That's a product that won't need a lot of customer support spend. That's a product that, so it basically makes everything in that company way, way easier when the product is that good, right? And so we know how to tell when a product is that or not. So that's a huge edge. Second piece is we know how to build those products. So founders who want to work with people like that come to us because they're like, I want to work with other people who know how to build these kinds of products. And there are very few investors, Dan, you're one of a handful still. There's a lot more designer angels out there, right? But I think like people who are just full-time investing and have a design background, or that's we can get into that later, another time. But that's definitely something I thought would be much more of we'd see a groundswell. If Designer Fund was successful, we'd see hundreds and thousands of designers becoming VCs.
Hasn't happened.
Has not happened, and I know exactly why, and we can talk about that. But that is why, so that's a second edge, is that people want to work with others who can help them build those products. And the third thing is we design venture now. So Enrique and I basically look at all the things that frustrates founders about venture, and we're like, why does it work this way? And most investors are like, this is the way it works.
Yep.
Okay, so let's take an example. You as a founder, you have an intro meeting with a VC, right? And then after that meeting, you say, okay, what happens from here on out? And they're like, we'll let you know.
If you get an email back.
Yeah, if you get an email back, right? And then like, if I get an email back, like, what happens then? Oh, you might have a partner meeting. Okay, then what happens then? We'll let you know. It's like, it's basically like super obtuse. And by the way, a lot of firms, even within the firms, different partners follow different processes. Some will just tell you right there, you get an investment. Some will take weeks of diligence. It just matters who you talk to. Well, what we did is we said, okay, well, let's standardize that process. And then like, when you first meet with Designer Fund, we send you like, here is our process. It's like intro meeting, phase 1, phase 2, close. And here's what we need to see to move to the various phases. So you know exactly what we're looking for. There's no hidden, there's no magic. It's like, what we're looking for, and we can tell you if you have it or not. And guess what? Founders love that. They love that it's a known, transparent process.
So surprising.
And it's so simple, right? All we did was, but it's like, we only did that because we talked to founders and realized like that was a frustration point. And we're like, well, why is it designed this way? It kind of was never designed. It was designed this way to benefit the investor. And so if you think about, well, how would we design it to benefit founders? You would do something very different, right?
Yeah.
Almost like, it's exactly like you have an order. It used to be like you'd order something and it would show up at some point. Now it's like, hey, order processed. It just shipped. It's delivering today. It just arrived at your door. Here's a photo of it, right? That's the same thing. Like, why don't we do that for founders? And it's because like, designers just are absent from the venture ecosystem, and we never have had to do that, right? Investors have never had to do that. So I think that's a huge edge for us because we approach every part of the VC ecosystem that way. Like, what are the things that are not working for us and founders and other players in the ecosystem? And let's just redesign it from the ground up to be better.
Yeah, I love that example. One of my favorite things to ask guests about is books. And, I'm curious for you, what books are near and dear to your heart? And, I think it would be interesting. I don't know if you have any answers here, so I might be kind of, shooting in the dark. But if you have any books that are around helping founders understand the power of design or what design is, or kind of books that demystify design or that are around design. And then secondarily, if there are any books that you find yourself referring to, giving out to founders that you end up investing in or working with.
Yeah, one thing that frustrates me, like people in tech, they love to read like business books and tech books, and the real, at least for me, I would say like, okay, those are fine, those are helpful, but it's like historically, when you look at like the books that have pointed us towards the future, it's been more like fiction, right? And those are book fiction and science fiction. So I actually like when I'm reading at night, I'm usually reading something like that, something that is challenging an assertion or just kind of like playing with some tension that we have in the current system through storytelling, right? Because we came up as storytellers, right? So like one example, there's a series called the Murderbot Diaries, Do you know about this book
No,
series?
never heard of it.
Never heard of it. Okay. It's amazing. People who are into science fiction love it and have heard of it. They're like, of course I've heard of it. So the Murderbot Diaries is basically this. It's a story of a thing called the Murderbot. It was a robot that was designed to do exactly what it sounds like, to murder things, right? But secretly, Murderbot has basically disabled its control mechanism. So humans still think this thing is supposed to be a Murderbot, and it's pretending to still be the Murderbot. But inside, it's basic, and the tone of the Murderbot is like super flippant and really sarcastic, and the whole
Sounds
thing.
amazing. Sounds
It's
amazing.
so good, and it's amazing storytelling. But it also like what takes it from like what we talk about good to extraordinary is that it really starts asking you these questions around what happens when these robots become sentient or like not like, and it's not clear that like it's not controlled anymore, but is it really sentient, and like what does that mean, and at what level, and the way it interacts with other robots who are controlled, right? And all that stuff is just like you can read someone's theory about AI and robotics, and it's dull, right? It's just boring. Like, who wants to read that? But like reading the Murderbot story, it's analyzing those same themes through story, and I find that just a lot more compelling. So yeah, I'm super into that. And then the other stuff I'm into are like coming of age stories. I'm like a huge sucker for coming of age stories, and actually one of my favorite ones is one called The Power of One. Have you ever heard of that book? It was actually written by someone who used to run an ad agency. And he ran an ad agency for decades. And then finally, he had all these stories he wanted to get out. And he wrote, and they're like epic coming of age stories. So this one's called The Power of One. And I think you'd love it. I think people who just are into coming of age stories would love it. And it's like this, again, it's like, what does it mean to have perseverance and grit and just fight and fight and fight through all these like these adverse situations? It's just a remarkable story. So those are the things I tend to be more into. And if you want like a design thing, I think one of the best things for people to read is The Design of Everyday Things, which will just all of a sudden start opening your eye to like, why is a handle like that? Why is a window shaped like that? Why does my lamp do that? Or like, why is a light switch vertical like this? But like, how do I know what light switch controls which light, and why isn't there a better way? Like, we're always like flipping things on and off because we're like, what does this control again? Like, and there are hundreds of millions of these light switches all over the world that is not clear. Why does it connect to like, why was that designed that way? Right. So it just starts all of a sudden, it opens your eyes to every little thing around you, because everything around you was designed, and it makes you ask like, why?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a phenomenal book. I love, it's a little bit of a tangent, but I love the idea of you, investing in a founder or in a company and then giving them the book, The Murderbot Diaries. Like, there you go. This is the book I would give you.
There are other books that are more aligned with like our value system that we give. But yeah, that would be funny. Like, here you go. This is it's not pro Murderbots.
Yes.
So, we had to. We'll give it with a note.
I would guess not by the narrator, by the way that the character's personality. But I love those recommendations. We'll link to those in the show notes, and I'm definitely going to download and read the Murderbot Diaries. One of the questions that I wanted to ask, this is, I love that you brought up the design of everyday things, because it's right exactly on that theme. But like being a designer, one of the experiences I've had is, it's both amazing because I think your mind is always, you're always kind of processing in the background or in the foreground of how you might change things, how things could be improved. But it also means, at least for me, that I'm just frustrated constantly by so many things in the real world that are, poorly designed, poorly made. And, so I guess the question I would ask you is, how does being a designer, working in design for 20 plus years at this point, change the way you see the world and show up in just your day-to-day experience?
I mean, it's exactly that. I cannot order something online and just like open the box and just be like, okay, here it is. Here's the thing. Like, great, let's go. Let's start using the thing. I am constantly looking at like, why did they package it this way? What's the typography? What's the label?
You're just griping constantly.
What's up?
You're just griping constantly.
It's not necessarily. It's either griping or like remarking on things. It's like, okay, here's like something that I just ordered is this like lightning jack. It's like, why does this even exist? And okay, so now I need to open it. Like, where is the there's no like easy way to, oh, why did Apple do it this way, right? Like, so there's all these like, I don't know. And even just like the fact that this exists is crazy, right? It's like, how many
Hmm.
fucking dongles do we have?
Too many.
Too many, too many. Like I have an open one and I needed another one because guess what? You know how often you lose something this tiny? Like
Well,
you need
yeah,
like
super
100 of
often.
these.
Super often. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think as a designer, I think we're plagued with this endless fascination of like why things are the way they are, why they were designed the way they are. But I think it's also what it's like that. Even things that are not human made, I think I'm also intrigued by like why nature, why nature's different ecosystems. Like if you look at like right now, I'm that's another thing I'm super fascinated by is like natural ecosystems, watersheds, ecological systems, that sort of thing. And it's pretty interesting. Like I'll throw one idea out there. It's like that I'm still like in the process of kind of thinking through, which is in the human world, there's this idea of growth, right? And we always want like more humans so that, if a country's not growing humans, like, you're kind of screwed, right? But in a natural park, if all of a sudden the wolves are growing too much, like you're in trouble, right? If one part of that ecosystem is growing too much, like that's trouble, right? And so that's interesting, right? So what is that? What is that? What is it that in nature we've always talked about the idea of sustainability and stasis and harmony, right? Um, and in humanity, well, for humanity to thrive, we need more. We need more people. We need, right? Like what's going on there? Like, and so those are the kinds of things that I think, to me, I start looking at like parallels between different system design, like, and where's the dissonance? Like where do we talk about things differently and why? And so I think those are the things that I think as a designer, it's like you can't turn that off, right?
Yeah.
And it can be definitely aggravating and frustrating, but I think it's just like it's that endless intellectual curiosity um, around how things are made that I think I just have on constantly.
I love that you brought up, the design of natural ecosystems. I could launch into a series of questions I'd love to ask you about that. We could go off on a tangent for 30 minutes, so it's really hard to keep myself on track here. One of the questions I want to ask, I've got two more questions. One is, you're really close to your 10-year anniversary of Designer Fund, or maybe you're almost at your 10-year anniversary. That's a long time. One of the books that I read recently that I really enjoyed, it's long, but it's really well written, is The Power Law, which I think for many ways, if you're interested in venture, it's just a great kind of historical retrospective. And I think one of the things you learn reading that book is very few firms survive for a decade or more. And if they do, it's very hard for them to stay at the top of their game and be able to evolve as a firm. So the question I wanted to ask you is, as you come up on this milestone and kind of think back on the last 10 years, what do you feel like are the biggest lessons that you've learned, and how has your thinking evolved? And this could be around venture, around the role of design in venture over the last 10 years.
It's maybe obvious, but I think this is not just for venture, but I think also just for people, and it's this idea of playing to your strengths. So I think for most of my life, like teachers and at work, it's always been like, hey, Ben's not good at X, or, he could be stronger at X. So, let's work on that. Hey, history, like I never gravitated towards, it's like, okay, so let's work on that. Right. Or, so, but I think the thing there's a power to playing to your strengths that, to me, now coming into, year 8, 9, 10, depending on where, like Designer Fund actually started in 2012. The first fund was 2014. So depending on where we were actually incorporated in November of 2012. So, but we started activity before that. So I don't know, like we're right around the 10-year mark. And for me, the idea of playing to our strengths has been, because you come into this and you start interviewing people like John Doerr and these luminaries, and you say, oh, like, how do I become that person? Right. And those are the heroes. Or Warren Buffett. Everyone wants to be the next Warren Buffett, right?
It's the emulation game.
Yeah. And it's like, don't you don't need to be the next Warren Buffett won't be Warren Buffett. Like it'll be someone totally different and they'll be going about it in a totally different way. And so I think I've gotten a lot more comfortable in kind of doing it our way. Right. So okay, so here's a good example. So like most funds, if you're successful, the expectation is just get bigger and bigger and bigger. Right. Well, guess what? Like your fund size though is your strategy. And so Designer Fund for 6 years, or sorry, 8 years now, we've been building all these relationships with great lead funds, and they're generalist funds, and they do all the things that, it's like they know about how to build great sales teams. They know about how to do go to market well. And it's, as we've been in this, like we've learned those things too, but I'm certainly not like the expert. I know where where I'm deep, and I know where I know enough to be dangerous, but where I recommend experts. And so there's this expectation, like if you're a small fund, get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and then all of a sudden you're just something very different. And guess what? Instead, so we're really collaborative. Enrique and I just, in our essence, we love to collaborate. And I think most designers do. Well, what happens if you're a lead fund that is also super into collaborating? Well, that kind of doesn't work. That's really tough because if you're a lead fund, there's only one lead.
Oh,
only
it's a
one
zero-sum game. You've changed games. Totally.
Yeah. And so, but for example, if you're not a lead, like, and this happened to us recently, like there's someone that raised money and they said to me like, hey, we're saving, a $500K check for you guys, but we have 6 leads. Help me pick a lead. Right.
Wow.
Well, that's really powerful, right? That we can do that. But guess what? If our fund was too big, we could, like, if I was the 7th term sheet going up against, Sequoia and Greylock and those, can I out Sequoia, Greylock? It's like everyone's like, who can build the next Sequoia? Like, you don't necessarily need to be building the next Sequoia to beat Sequoia or to do as good as it. And even just beat Sequoia, like even saying that, what are you doing? Like, it's just like, do you want to be a good investor?
Why?
What plays to your strengths? And play that game. Play the game the way you want to play it. And so for Enrique and I, we realized like, let's make sure that our funds are of the size that allow us to be collaborative. And just because LPs want to put more money to work and are seeing great returns from us, and want us to build bigger funds, that's not the reason to put together a bigger fund. The bigger reason is because you want to be a lead fund. But if that doesn't play your strength, don't do that. So I think that's the thing. To me, one of the things I've learned is just kind of own, the power of being a designer investor and what you're good at, and do that, and don't try to be, don't be like, oh, I'll put on the vest and I'll talk that game, like I'll outdo them at their game. Like do your own, outdo them at your game and make them play your game. So I think that's the thing that I've kind of really come to realize, but it's taken a long time, man, because it's like you basically feel like a fish out of, you feel like there's the imposter syndrome. And VCs are, for all the shit that we say about VCs, most of them are really fucking smart. Most of them are really fucking driven. Most of them are really good at sales. You don't get to be in this business unless, right? And most of them have a ton of confidence, for better or worse, right? So like that's the system of people that you're going into, and it's really easy to feel like, oh crap, like I didn't go to that school, or I didn't spend 8 years at that top fund or whatever it is. But you own kind of the things that you're strong at, that every investor would be like, whoa, okay, well, I can't do what they do, right? Like most investors can't build products the way we build products, right?
No,
so,
not at all.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's the thing over the years that I've come to kind of find more peace with. It's like, hey, you belong here. And in fact, and by the way, our returns are like top quartile return. Like not only do we belong, we're like better than most investors, right? So like, people always talk like, should designers code? And maybe the next thing, should designers invest? And so far, the answer, I think, is yes.
I love it. The answer is so well said. I can already tell just in the questions I've asked you so far that I'm going to be listening to this interview many other times. I love it. Last question. If you could go back to the start of your career and whisper any words of advice in your ear, is there anything you would tell your former kind of younger self?
Totally. I was thinking about this question. The further I am, so did you go to like design school or no?
No, self-taught.
Self-taught. Okay. So, and you're not alone. There's plenty of like self-taught designers. But there's also a lot of like designers that go to design school. And I think, every designer, when they talk to you about, being a designer, and there's this idea of portfolio, right? And portfolio is the output. It's the visual output of all the stuff that we do. And we obsess over that, right? And early in my career, I think it was all about, how is this going to look in my portfolio? Is this piece of work good enough to be in my portfolio? Even when I was at Facebook, I was like, I want to make sure that this is like everything I do. I'm like, is this good enough for me to put on my website and say this is, I want to show my life's work. Will this meet that bar for life's work? And the reality is, when I look back at my experiences, I cannot for the life of me tell you like if about the output of the work that we did, but I can absolutely tell you about the relationships I built at those companies and the like memories of the things that we did together. And a lot of it was around the work, but a lot of it wasn't. And so I think for me, it's like, don't obsess over the output as much as who are you around, and what's the impact of the work that you're having. Because I think too much designers are kind of being told to just focus on kind of, and even I said like the craft, right? But it's like, when you look at the people who are doing great work, a lot of it is like, it's collaborative, it has impact, and what they remember is kind of the environment. For me, at least, like it's the environment and the experience that we had together. And so I think as designers, we're just I would tell myself, hey, like, don't forget to just kind of step back and kind of revel in the people that are around you, the experiences you're having, and actually like make time for those experiences. Make time to go spend time with the people you're working with, make time to stay up really late with the people you're working with, make time to do those silly shenanigan-y things. And actually, and lately I've been thinking a lot about like this remote work thing that we're all going into, and basically like how much that's taken away from people, right? It's like, everyone's like, it's so much more efficient. Well, guess what? Like, work is not just about like doing things efficiently. And again, that's the designer in me, right? The designer in me is like, what is the employee experience? And so the business people are like, this is great. We're getting like, 70% more efficiency. That was at first. But now we're actually finding that the efficiency gains are not there. Guess why? Because it's not as fun. It's not as interactive. It's not as engaging, right? All of a sudden now efficiency is falling off a cliff. Well, as a designer, I could have told you from day one that this would happen. And so I think that to me, it's like, I would have gone back to myself and just say like, hey, take them, celebrate those moments and kind of make time for more of those moments. And because that's the stuff you'll really remember.
I think it's so well said, and it makes me think of, it's like your work is almost backwards looking. That's what you get to keep after you leave the place, or it's what you take away. It's some, I don't know, it's some proof that you were there and you did some things. But the relationships are what will make you a better person, a better designer, a better thinker, a better leader 6 months, 12 months, 24 months, 36 months from now. It's all of those things. And they take time. It takes time for those things to kind of, for you to process them and for that to, kind of surface in who you are and the way you show up in the world. But I think it's incredibly well said.
Maybe another, like a clarification. I remember like my first job, it was at an agency and all of us were basically pitted one against the other. So the agency was this is the antithesis
common in agencies.
Yeah. So that basically a client would say, hey, I need a new website. And like three of us would design, and the best site wins, right? And so the three designers would go off on their own. And if you win, if your thing was like the thing that the client wanted, it's like you won. Well, like, what is that? Like, what experience is that, right? That's like, and it's almost like building relationships there was you almost felt like, well, why would I, these are my competitors in the company. They're your competitors because we're all competing, for the client to choose our thing. And so like, that was like one of my first experiences, right? And to go from that to like what Facebook and Designer Fund was ultra collaborative. It's like, if you do well, we all do well. And that's what we're trying to like even go lean into. And same as a fund, as a firm, like it's easy to be like, okay, well, if we do in most funds, like it's mostly the partners that if they do well, like the partners do well. For Enrique and I, it's like, how do we make it so if designer fund does well, the entire design ecosystem does well, hundreds of designer angels do well, thousands of design leaders do well. That for us is like the success beyond just the returning 3-5x to our LPs. And we actually believe like it's not only are those things at odds with each other, we actually think if we do those things well, if we serve the design ecosystem well at scale, if we serve the VC ecosystem with design at scale well, the returns actually will follow, and even it'd be better if we do that well.
Well, I think it's a perfect note to end on. Thank you so much for joining me, Ben. This has been an amazing conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.